Driving Change in Maritime. Welcome to another episode of Teqplay's Vodcast series. Today, I will be talking to the Maritime Sisters, Marjolein and Sylvia Boer. Together, we will discuss how to move towards a future-proof maritime sector. Stay tuned to our conversation. Marjolein, Sylvia, welcome.
Thank you, Leon.
Very good to have you on this show. We've been planning this already for quite a while.
So
I wanted to have you on the show, but finally we managed to find a date.
And we really wanted to be here, so we made it happen. Okay. And it's great to see your incredible studio.
Yeah. Great. And I love to have this conversation. Really looking forward to it. But I think it's good and fair to ask you to give a short introduction towards the audience, like who are you and what brought you to the maritime sector? Yeah. And I need to choose, but Marjolein...
That's not fair. Well, maybe it's nice to mention that we actually go way back, right? Yeah. I actually checked it before coming to the show. Yeah. 2016, the World Port Hackathon.
Wow. Yeah. That was where we actually started on the journey to bring innovation to the maritime space and maritime sector.
Yeah, and I still think the concept really applies, actually. Yeah. So bringing together data, experts, and talent from all over the world to co-create the port of the future.
Yeah.
So, but
to answer your question, who we are obviously
Marjolein
and Sylvia Boer, and we are literally Maritime Sisters, born and raised in the beautiful village Sliedrecht, close to Rotterdam, where dredging was basically invented. And we had a father that worked in the maritime industry, and he just took us along to ship launches, to exhibitions. So at a very young age, we were already walking around in this shipbuilding, this masculine environment, and we were just fascinated by the international character, the innovation that took place.
But also the magnitude, right?
Oh, yeah.
Incredible vessels. Yeah. So you could basically say we were born with maritime DNA born as Maritime Sisters.
Born and raised.
Exactly. So it was really inevitable that we both ended up in maritime.
Yeah. And our backgrounds are quite similar. We worked in the ports, the shipbuilding, the offshore energy industry. And this network, we bring it now together. And while working at great companies, I mean, you were at Port of Rotterdam, I was at Damen Shipyards, later on Amsterdam, at offshore ports. We actually noticed that the whole transition towards a sustainable maritime future was not going fast enough, we thought. So
we especially saw SMEs struggling, whereas we thought they're really the engine for change, because usually they're more willing to collaborate and to take risks, which are both key factors in accelerating.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And we also noticed that the industry was, I already mentioned, masculine, but also not very it's very wide and not very diverse. While we think if you want to innovate, if you want to find the solutions that we need for the future, and so you need to innovate, but you cannot do that with similar homogeneous teams. You need diversity.
Yeah, so we really felt the lack of diversity was limiting our innovation power. And we also concluded that the position of the Netherlands as a maritime nation was really at stake.
Yeah, sometimes we're not adapting to the new reality fast enough, and then investments are staying behind.
And with that, scaling up of new technologies that we really need to make our industry more sustainable. So that for us was a trigger to start our own company, because we figured it's really not going fast enough and we need to accelerate the transition to a sustainable maritime future.
So how are you moving this wheel then? How do you make it move faster in that sense? What is it that you bring to the table that speeds up?
We try and help companies with strategy and innovation challenges by sometimes confronting or challenging management teams in a sort of a unconventional manner.
I think the fact that we are women in a male-dominated world, by definition, means that usually we come in with a different perspective and different ideas. You could say in these projects we function as an outboard engine for change, or we help propel new players into the market with explorations or validation trajectories.
But we also look at topics that we think are really relevant to our industry at a certain moment, but are not really on the strategic agendas of the big organization or the key stakeholders. Circularity is a topic, and we're pretty material and capital intensive as an industry. I mean, we're building ships. So a lot of material involved, but we rarely think about where does the material come from? Is there enough available? And with the geopolitical challenges at the moment, you might consider, is that smart that we don't really know and think about our supply chain and how vulnerable we are?
Exactly. So we dive into topics that we feel are important. for the future of our maritime sector. And we try to not only provide depth into what's going on, but also try to make it land on strategic agendas, of course, collaborating with others.
Yeah.
We can tell you more about the circular program we're running together with the city later. And I think the last part is setting up collaborations, forming consortia, because
no company, how big they are, doesn't really matter. Even Port of Rotterdam or a bigger company, they cannot innovate or work towards the future on their own. You're always involved in a complete ecosystem, and you need to take that into account.
Nobody can tackle the huge challenges that we're facing on their own.
Oh, well,
you know about it.
I know, yeah. I've been in the industry for 10 years now, and what I really underestimated when I entered into the industry, I thought I could bring change very quickly.
Welcome.
I was very, very, very positive, and I was confident that would happen.
It's the right mindset.
It is the right mindset, but it is also good. That is what I learned. Is like it's a different type of change that is required, because if you look at the maritime industry, it's actually not one part. It's a large combination of parts that are working together and that have been fine-tuned over decades or even centuries on how we do business. If you look at the contracts, a lot of the contracts still date more than 100 years ago. But it's also it brought certainty. It helped people to in this uncertain world to move along. So there are quite some very strong mechanisms in the industry available, which I really like. But it is really incorporated very deeply. So change is one of the big challenges in that.
Well, it's a really complex and interconnected system that plays a key role in our society and economy, but most people are not aware of that. And to change it, you need to get the entire system to move. And I think the contracts that you mentioned also limit the implementation of new systems sometimes. So
what we like to do is there are always companies that are willing to walk a bit faster or to adapt to new technology or to experiment. We try and find those players. We basically say we look for where there's energy, positive energy, and we try and multiply that because there's already something moving. And sometimes it's just an idea they have in mind, and they don't know how to enlarge it. Well, quite often we know in the supply chain, we know who operates a ship. We know who builds the ships. We know who maintains them. So we can easily connect all the dots and just bring the players together, bring them around one table and discuss the topic and how we can take away challenges. Because sometimes it's as simple as that. Just make the connections.
And at least understand each other's positions. So start with the right conversation, but usually it indeed starts with where we feel there's energy and players willing to have an open conversation on what we're facing right now and how we could break through that.
But in the optimization world, it's exactly the same, right? You're looking for a coalition of the willing.
Exactly.
And you start, and still, then it's a journey because there are so many levels involved. There are so many.
What we know for sure is that nothing will stay the same. It's like the perfect storm at the moment. Everything's changing. So you have to anticipate and work with that.
Exactly.
And be open-minded.
But it creates a really interesting momentum too. So if you look at what's going on in the maritime industry, at least from a Dutch perspective, starting with the Dutch perspective, industry politics are back. Which is since for the first time in decades that the government decided we really need to maintain our strategic shipbuilding capabilities
within the Netherlands, and eventually it needs to be the European continent, because if we just look at the Netherlands, it's too small.
Exactly.
But we need to protect, we need to make sure we keep dry feet. So dredging is very important.
We need to maintain our energy infrastructure at sea. Install more energy infrastructure, also protect it.
Protect it and also protect ourselves. So the military safety, of course, is increasing. And
that's another one,
maritime is, of course, of big importance for our earning power.
So these are the
main drivers,
national vital interests that we need to protect, according to the government. So they said in certain strategic shipbuilding segments, we need to maintain our capabilities to both build and maintain those vessels.
And if you look at the past, we used to be, we had 45% of the worldwide shipbuilding capabilities. Do you know how less it decreased? So to say, what the percentage is now?
So 45% market share in the 80s, European market share.
Well, that's a couple of 2% maybe.
Oh, 4.
Okay.
So,
but still it's
nearly gone. So we really need to change our strategy. So it's good that the politicians also noticed, and now they're helping us. We actually created sort of an agenda for the sector together with the government on what actions can we take, and we're executing them.
Yeah. So the industry created that agenda together with the government, and basically what it says, it's supporting measures to make sure that we maintain an equal level playing field.
But also we arrange financing challenges that are there in order to we can continue building ships.
Yeah, but it also means that we need to create the yard of the future. So build ships in a different way to make sure that we become more competitive. And the aim is to build them 10 to 15% cheaper, which is a big step.
Yeah.
So that's a challenge we're facing right now. On top of that, we need to take it to a European level, because I think it's clear that we need to think about our strategic autonomy as a continent.
Yeah.
And then there's the resources you already mentioned, that so certain materials are becoming scarce or geopolitically complex.
But also resources personnel-wise, because of the scaling up of our defense industry. Also, they're ordering more ships to keep us safe on a European level. But of course, they also attract a lot of resources in order to build those ships or operate those ships. And we're already dealing with a labor market that's a bit tense, you could say. So there's not enough staff. So that's also a challenge we're facing.
So it's a big challenge, and resources are tight.
If you look at the global scale, if you also look at prices dropping, how Chinese shipyards are stepping in, is the ambition of going to a cost reduction of 15%, is that sufficient? How big is that gap? Do you
it's actually 20 to 30%.
Yeah.
And the Dutch ship owners, they said in this exploration, so if you manage to cut it in half, we would be willing to invest in ships to purchase ships in the Netherlands again.
But you have to consider as well, we don't build all the same ship types. No. So in China, they also build the huge container vessels. Yep. We will never build them in the Netherlands. We focus more on specialized vessels with a lot of technology and a lot of innovations involved. Because if we look at the timing, we need to reduce our greenhouse gases, and we need to do that fast. So our ships need to sail more energy efficient, less carbon, and we are going to switch to alternative fuels. And we're front runner on that field. So that sets us apart from what they're building in China. Of course,
they're building more and more sophisticated vessels there, of course, as well. But if you look at what we have in the Netherlands, I think we have quite some interesting cards. Looking at the shipbuilding capabilities, also the repair cluster, it's quite complete, right? If you look at the shipyards, the components, the equipment suppliers.
We're a small country, obviously. But besides that, we also have a lot of knowledge institutions. So we have TNO, we have the Marin. We have a lot of really good educations from Technical University Delft or Eindhoven, but also higher educations. And also the educations to train our technicians. It's all within this one country, and they all try and collaborate and make sure that it functions best for our industry. And I think that makes us pretty unique.
Yeah, and if you look at the way, the innovations that the maritime industry produces from the Netherlands, I think it really sets us apart. So that's why we achieved that position as a leading maritime nation. But as I said, we need to make sure that we maintain it so that we can actually build those strategic vessels.
Well, the car industry, China has proven that it can do it, that it can go very fast, and it can create clusters of knowledge and push that forward. So I think it's definitely something that we need to keep focus and an eye on.
And we need to do it now. That's the thing.
I also am convinced that we can learn from China and other countries, shipbuilding-wise, because we need to make our ships, we need to build them cheaper. So we need our production technologies also to change. And perhaps we're looking at, for the art of the future, we're looking at robotization and digitalization. And I think in China, there might be ahead of us. We're sometimes so arrogant in the Netherlands, think that we
are ahead of everything.
And we go on these trade missions, and then we're going to tell the inviting country, listen, this is how we do it in the Netherlands. You should... I think we can also...
learn from each other.
And we need to, because we need to catch up really fast.
So the question is, what is the threshold, right? So we're back at 4% shipbuilding or market share. Yeah, so what is the tipping point?
Yeah,
Have we maybe already crossed it?
Yeah.
So the momentum is really now. So there's industry politics from the government. There's a huge sustainability
request. Basically.
Yeah. So it's clear, FuelEU Maritime and
EU
the IMO midterm measures that were just accepted.
Yeah.
They require us to step by step increase our energy efficiency and reduce our...
In combination with a worldwide fleet that's aging, it's really average 22 and a half years old.
Yep.
So
this is...
it's an opportunity.
It's the perfect momentum to build those strategic vessels. And we need to do it now, and we need to do it smartly, also dealing with the materials that we have in a very smart way.
Yeah. And then you think this is already quite a big ambition, I would say, like getting that industry initiatives up on top of it, and then you add another layer and saying like we want to put the circularity on the agenda.
Well,
how does that connect?
We actually believe it's the only way to build them in a future-proof way.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Because as we said, we see that certain materials are becoming more scarce or geopolitically complex. So if we want to maintain our strategic shipbuilding capabilities, we need to think about where are the resources coming from, where's the potential dependencies, and we can build more competitively if we do so as well.
To give you an example, we're looking with a system integrator, Alewijnse. They approached us and they said, actually, would it be able to build ships with less amount of cable on board? And to give you an example, a small pilot boat in the ports.
Yeah, take an educated guess.
Yeah.
How many kilometers of cable do you think are on board?
In such a small boat?
A tender vessel of the...
That's a lot. I think if you know, just do the multiplication, the number of wires, I think, I would go something like 10 kilometers.
It's 16 kilometers in a small boat, but if you look at, that's the other perspective, is the Pioneering Spirit, which is of course the largest ship. It's, Edward, last time we spoke to him, he said when we deliver the ship, it's about 6,000 kilometers of cable. But now with all the modifications, he estimates it's 10,000 kilometers of cable, which is not only expensive, it's scarce resource use, but it's also weight you add to a vessel. So there's huge saving potential there. If we could build ships we're striving towards 20% less kilometer of cable in 2030. That's a huge saving for the industry in all perspectives.
Yeah. So Alewijnse, they approached us after we did an exploration of circular opportunities for maritime, together with Blue City. And we published a report. We're not necessarily report writers, but in this case, we made an exception because we thought it's really important to convey the message that there's huge opportunities here.
Yeah.
And they approached us after and they said, well, we see an opportunity to reduce cable use, but it's actually not our current business model because we look at how many kilometers of cable. So it's actually counterintuitive for the organization. But we see that copper is becoming more scarce. This is the future. So, but we're never at the table in an early enough stage to actually reduce the amount of cables.
During the design phase, they're always later on during the build phase they are contacted and.
Yeah. So what we said is, okay, who's a shipbuilder that we think open to this message?
And that we know very well. Yeah. Of course, Damen, because...
Cable supplier and also classification society, because they need to approve, of course, the new drawings systems. And we put them at the same table with the goal to reduce 20%.
In 2030?
Yeah.
But already
in two working sessions was achieved on paper, and it will be implemented on the next Damen Combi freighter. Yeah. And it's really a win-win.
We organized a meeting with other Dutch shipbuilders from the Yard of the Future consortium. I think there were around 8. And let Alewijnse present that business case. And already IHC and Neptune, they showed interest in, okay, can we look at our ship designs too? And what can we? So in that way, it's, the movement is spreading. And that was just the copper example. We were also looking at a tunnel thruster.
A 20-year-old
20-year-old. And if we can remanufacture it, so bring it back into new state and also sell it, put it on the market as brand new, but you save 40 to 60% economically. And of course, 60 to 80% materials. Yeah. Because you reuse it.
It's more ecological. So AG Marine, they initiated this project because they saw an opportunity. Could we bring back this tunnel thruster to new state and then also sell it as such? So they entered a consortium with Bureau Veritas. Yeah. And the Technical University of Delft.
Yeah.
And there's already a ship owner who said, "Yeah, I'm willing to implement this on one of my vessels because it's a no-brainer, basically." But the idea is that you could do this for so many more components.
Yeah, they estimate 20 to 30 components that we could easily remanufacture, and they sort of created a remanufacturing network, and we're trying to expand that as well because it would be so much better if we would just.
But it requires a different way of looking at these components, because can we actually see a 20-year-old tonneau thruster as new?
Brand new?
And it's interesting because the Classification Society says we don't really mind the age. We just look at the properties. So
and the performance.
Yeah.
For them, that's all that matters.
So to answer your question, maybe you forgot about it. It was a very long answer.
I forgot about the question.
No, but you said, so it's another layer of complexity. I guess it's
another opportunity.
The way you look at it. So for certain materials for which we have certain dependencies, of course it's going to be complex because we need to reduce those dependencies. And the fact is that we are dependent on China for a lot of critical raw materials. But in other cases, it's also really an interesting business case. And sustainability-wise, we really have no choice.
No.
To really create future-proof shipbuilding.
It's nice to see, but you see also two different speeds. So on one end is like I want to adapt quickly within this industry. So something changes in the world, and I need to adapt. Now, you don't build a ship in a week, but I think also a couple of companies are really focusing on speeding up that kind of process.
Building on stock.
And then on the other end, you've got this process where you say like, well, we take a completely different approach. We don't know yet everything because it's not fully designed. You've got a lot of old things that you need to repurpose or reuse. It had really two different models. It's going to be interesting to see how this plays out in that part.
Yeah, definitely. Sure. And then there's of course the existing fleet. So on average, the ship will last for like 40 years. So there's also a huge question going on: how do we future-proof the current fleet, because we don't have the capacity to rebuild all of those ships, nor the financial opportunities.
Can we extend the lifetime of the existing fleet by, for example, changing the propulsion system? Or add wind sails add certain technologies due to which a ship becomes more energy efficient. So the wind sails that you can put on deck in order to reduce fuel consumption.
Those are the first steps that we can take, but it's quite challenging to match the ship, the technology, and the funding.
That will be the challenge, right? It's going to be interesting to see how these models also fit into the financial systems, because there is a lot in new build. There's a lot of guarantee. There you can organize it completely.
But it
also there
really fit,
you see the Chinese competition, because a lot of Dutch ship owners also go to China for funding. So that's why we also in the sector agenda address the financing part. You don't want all your ships to be financed by China, because also that's a risk.
Yeah. But I think it's also good to understand that on average, a Dutch ship owner sells their vessel
after 12
and a half years. Because there's a really good resale market.
At this point in time, it's perfect, right?
But the question is that really smart if we want to maintain the materials? But there's no really an incentive.
And do you see this example of circularity and looking at this way at the industry? Is that also something that you see in China or in other regions in the world? Or is it really a different and a new way of thinking, which is typically from the Netherlands?
Well, I think you can say it's in our industry from start, because usually you don't design and build ships to last for 5 years. It's always to last for at least 25, 30 years, and we try and extend the lifetime for various reasons. So that way, you could say it's already in our industry, but I think the whole movement that's going on now is more a European thing, because we find ourselves also vulnerable for access to certain resources. And I think when the Ukraine-Russia war started, all of a sudden we were cut off steel for a while. We relocated to Japan or other countries. But there were a couple of weeks that the prices of steel went up and everyone was panicking. We had no supply easily to steel. So that woke up some people. And also...
But also the narrative, it changed for us as well. Because when we started, we mainly focused on the opportunities for circularity to build more competitively and more sustainably. And now the layer that we're adding is strategic autonomy, which of course the whole world is looking at that right now. So it's not just a maritime thing. It's
And if we take it off the physical building, if we look at digitization, how do the Maritime Sisters look at digitization, and what role does it play from your perspective in this?
It's a huge enabler.
Huge enabler, yeah.
Yeah.
For a lot of the challenges that we're facing. So if you look at the steps that we need to take in energy efficiency wise, I think the first step is optimizing the systems and make sure we cut the slack out of the system. Well, you know all about that.
Yeah.
That's the first step that we can take for a huge amount of emission reduction.
Yeah, but if you look at the ship owners the ones that operate the ship, if you can study the sailing behavior, you can also adjust it. So sometimes it means the speed can go down a bit in order to save exhaust gases.
Yeah. I think that is actually the game that Teqplay is in.
That
we need to play. Yeah,
and it's a really important step.
Yeah, it's all about making it visible, exposing where there are inefficiencies, and once you see them, then there is an opportunity to actually address them.
But I can imagine you also see more interest in your solutions now that ship owners are being forced to step by step increase their energy efficiency.
Regulation is definitely an important driver. Europe is taking a leading role, and some people are complaining about it. Some people are saying it like this is a blessing, or it is not. But that depends a bit on where you are in this position.
But I think it also helps with the personnel challenge we have. Because we had a very nice visit to CFAR, and they have now a pilot for autonomous shipping in the port of Antwerp, and they have a control center in the port of Antwerp by which they control the vessels.
Yeah.
So you create jobs on shore, new jobs, that we can open up to a lot of people that first were not interested in becoming a seafarer.
Yeah. So of course, they already did a pilot in inland shipping, but now they're doing the first short sea pilot together with Fastlines. Yeah. And Fastlines said it doesn't add up yet, the business case, but we see it's going to become more challenging to find seafarers in the future. So
we need to change.
If they collaborate with systems such as CFAR, we can become a lot more efficient. Yeah.
But also to test innovations. If you look at the Maren, they opened a whole new 7 Ocean Simulator Center.
Have you been there?
No, I haven't.
Oh, amazing.
We'll invite you because
that's good.
We'll go on a tour.
On a tour, make some recordings.
You can be our maritime brother.
But they combine AR, VR, so you can really, and also they have of course the basins that you can test in. So you can combine all the technologies to simulate very complex offshore operations in a completely safe environment. You can test everything, and if you mess up, I was about to use another word. If you mess up, there's no harm done because it's a testing environment. So they train people, but also situations. So they increase safety at sea, efficiency, and operability. Yeah. So I think that's very important, and that's digitalization.
Yeah, and of course, if we look at the circularity, it's really a key enabler when it comes to life cycle assessments, material tracking. So what happened to the materials along the way? Which conditions did they face? Material passports to even know what's in a ship, and once it is dismantled, what qualities do we encounter and what can we reuse? But also when it comes to predictive maintenance, avoiding material use.
Yeah, sometimes really important. A component does not need to be replaced, but we replace it because we think, it had so many hours. But if it's still functioning perfectly, why would you? Yeah,
that's which economies do you let prevail? Is that the amount of labor, or is that the amount of material cost in that sense? Yeah.
And if we start looking at it from a material perspective, we will change our behavior probably. But then we need the systems to actually tell us, give us the information to know when to replace it, and also in exchanging parts. There's a Requip Foundation was set up for exchanging offshore equipment on a platform. So supply and demand finding each other. Maybe we don't all need the same equipment. Maybe we can create a pool of equipment that we can leverage a lot smarter together. So it's really a key enabler.
It's interesting to think about that, because if you look at the industry, what I always see, if you look at the port and you look at a lot of the industry but that's already there for 50, 60, 70 years, one of the capabilities that is over there is actually repurposing or keeping these things operational. I think it is something which is already ingrained deeply in the industry. Of course, the question is like, is it as sustainable as it should be?
No, not.
That is one of the challenges
yet.
I do see in that repurposing strategy. It's like, it depends on which variable you look at on what is the contribution. Is that the materials? Is that the emissions, or is that something else?
Yeah.
Labor cost involved in keeping it up to par. So,
and we need to look at the entire system to make it future-proof. But that's what we said. It's circular thinking is not necessarily new if you look at maximum uptime and the lifetime of vessels. But we're adding a whole new layer of opportunities to make sure we
open up a different discussion. I think that's what's really important. And it can be on so many levels. So
yeah. Maybe wrapping it kind of up is like you've been in this world now for quite a while. You bring a different a different type of energy. But what is it that the industry needs to do, or what is the thing that you want to give over as a point to take home or from this podcast?
Oh, we have to choose just one.
Yeah.
Yes, well, I think focus might be a good one.
That for sure that is. That's what we always say. Well, I think the main, one of the main points we're trying to make is that we cannot assume that we have unlimited access to our resources. It might not even be personnel, but in order to build our ships, it's not unlimited. So we really need to think more strategic about these challenges. And also together with our entire supply chain, because you can think you have it in order, but if you peel down and go down the supply chain, your suppliers, where do they get their products from?
Exactly.
So you might be very vulnerable without even knowing it. And I think that's key nowadays to at least know.
Yeah. So that's the call to action. Like from a serious perspective, we really need to think about it. But from an optimistic perspective,
I'm always optimistic.
The way we try to bring change is really looking for where's the energy. So even in the supply chain, if you try to change the system, it's not always the big players that can change the fastest. So what we often find is that the small and medium-sized players are often more willing and more open to changing. So to take the first step, maybe also look at those players and see where's the energy.
Yeah, and not
you can multiply that.
The start and scale-ups, because they have sometimes such new viewpoints, but they have now not the entrance to the larger companies. So what we try and do is match them with other players, and we don't even need to get anything from that, but it's just to help and bring new technologies to our industry.
That will contribute and create movement, because that's what we need.
Yeah. I guess the action point is like, start looking where is your change agent, of what is the thing that you can start to contribute and start acting upon it.
Yeah, and make waves.
Yeah, make waves. Yeah.
Cool.
Get propelled, we always say.
Get propelled, okay. Thank you, ladies. Thank you, Marjolein.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sylvia.
You're welcome.
And I enjoyed having you on the podcast.
Yeah,
Great.
me too.
Thanks.
Time flew, bye.
Okay, nice.